Hello, this is Rabbi Juan Marcos Bejarano Gutierrez. I just wanted to do a quick video. I was traveling this week and I did do some videos, but I didn't have a chance to do as many as I wanted to. I wanted to touch briefly upon one topic that I really haven't covered extensively, at least in this video series, and that's one of the question of why so many Spanish Jews converted to Christianity. Generally, when you look at studies on this issue, there's always a comparison between Jews in Ashkenaz in the Rhineland who suffered during the period of the Crusaders who were traveling toward the Holy Land. And there's often the sense that in Ashkenazic lands there was a sense that martyrdom was the ultimate uh, goal, if you will, when faced with persecution. And there's no question that there were many righteous martyrs. They committed Kiddush Hashem. They sanctified the name of God in the lands of Ashkenaz, but it's also true that there were cases of Crypto-Judaism. There were cases in which individuals succumbed to the pressure of violence and the threat of violence, and some of them converted. And we have various cases that are discussed in various works. But in the case of the Iberian Peninsula, one of the things I wanted to mention was actually several, is there's cultural and theological differences that are in play. For example, the influence of Islam is something that is not typically appreciated. Uh, Islamic culture penetrated the peninsula in 711 and, of course, would stay as a major force throughout much of the medieval period. And in fact, of course, Muslim control of the southern part of the peninsula and the Kingdom of Granada would continue until 1492. And even after that, of course, there were large numbers of Muslims and then converts from Islam to Christianity, the term Moriscos, who maintained a very strong Islamic identity, even if they were technically prohibited from doing so. And the reason I bring them up is because this concept of Taqqiya, of dissimulation, was something that I think has to be seriously looked at as a possibility that a source that influenced Spanish Jews or Iberian Jews. Dissimulation in Islamic countries, especially among Shiites, but I think it's also found in other elements of Islam, is basically this idea that a person can feign adherence to another religion temporarily or as needed to survive. And in fact, there's different texts that I mentioned in Secret Jews that talk about this concept. And some of these texts actually involve an individual being tortured. He's captured by Christian armies. He blasphemes against the Prophet Muhammad. He does things that are, of course, in contradiction or against Islam. Then he manages to escape, and basically, I think he has I can't remember if it's a vision or he runs into the Prophet, and he explains the situation, and the Prophet responds something like, well, are you strong in your faith? What does your heart tell you? And the person says, yes, I'm strong. And Muhammad responds, if you need to do it again, do it. And so there's a sense that martyrdom in Islam is not the same as it is in Christianity. It's not elevated in the same way. The martyr in Islam is an individual who dies in battle. A holy martyr is somebody who is fighting the enemies in physical battle, and if they fall, then they're elevated to the status of a martyr, not simply someone who gives themselves up or, if you will, just dies as a consequence of not wanting to engage in what's perceived as idolatry. So I think that concept did influence many Spanish Jews. We find elements of this in some of the responsa that details questions that were asked of authorities in North Africa, for example, rabbis, about individuals trying to keep Pesach, Passover. And one of the rabbis responds about ways that they can do that so that they are not too, that it's discreet, that it's not too, overt or, out in the open. And so this element does exist in Islamic cases. We have a little bit more of an example because there was actually sort of a responsa, if you will, the equivalent of that was written by an imam, giving full details to Muslims on how they could dissimulate. Now, in many ways, I think Islam had an advantage because of the fact that it incorporates it incorporates Christian elements into their theology. Miriam or Mary appears in Islamic thought. Jesus appears in Islamic thought, and they are figures of note. And so an individual could say, they believed in these figures, and they would not necessarily be violating, the plain aspect or the simple level of Islamic belief. And so that was one of the ways that they would address these issues. And so it's just interesting that we don't think about that enough. I think that Islam played a major part in influencing Jewish life, theologically, culturally, linguistically. We see that, of course, in the writings, the great writings of the Rambam, who wrote in Arabic, the Moreh Nebuchim, the Guide to the Perplexed, and so many poets and rabbis that were writing in the 10th and 11th centuries were writing, of course, in Arabic. The other element that I think that we have to think about is one of that is much more controversial, and that's the issue of Kabbalah. Rabbi Josef Aur was one of the individuals who brought this up in his work. I think it's called In the Shadow of History, Jews and Conversos at the Dawn of Modernity. It's one of the first books that I read on this topic a very long time ago, 25 years ago. And it's a fascinating work. I think there are many people who would critique it today, but I think that he points out many things that should be of consideration in this, that in the sense that Kabbalah transformed some fundamental aspects of Jewish life. And as where before, if we look at the Rambam, the Maimonides, Rabbi Moses ben Maimon, as sort of the pinnacle of halacha, the generations that came after him, certainly within in the peninsula, were influenced by Kabbalah that came from France to a certain extent, and their perspectives on theology were very different. And maybe if Aur goes a little bit too far in noting the impact of that, but I think the issue of Gilgul, of the transmigration, reincarnation of souls, may have played a part to some extent, because this idea that if an individual has, if you will, more than one chance, they may look at persecution a little bit differently. Hey, if I have another chance, maybe I won't I won't give myself to death, because I might come back and I'll have another chance in the future. And what's interesting to me, and I feel somewhat convinced by this idea, is that if you look at the case of conversos who returned to Judaism in the 17th century in Amsterdam, this issue is also an issue of note. And in another video, I'll talk about that more, but I just wanted to sort of lay these out and talk about some of these things. As we're going through the history, I think it's important to also talk about some of the theological issues that are in play and how that may have affected individuals who are faced with persecution. All right, so we'll see you in the next video, and we'll continue our series.